Anywhere we go is fine with me. So why don't you do a little bio, like tell us a little bit about yourself, and please tell me how you pronounce your name, because I'm looking at your name and I'm going, I'm not going to be able to pronounce it correctly. So
I usually say to people, come close good enough. Chances are that I'm the only guy with such a name in there. J is silent. So Veljko.
Oh, okay. Veljko, that's so easy.
Yes.
I love it. Like once you know the rules, then it's easy to figure out, right?
Yes, I mean, I don't know, does this apply to every language, but what worked well for me was that if something was sounding really difficult to pronounce, I simply swallow the parts of the words that are difficult to pronounce. And that way I know that even if I'm not correct, I am making a mistake that the receiver is used on.
Yeah.
So,
that's true. That's true.
A little bit of my background. I am somebody who was privileged to be in the AI from the moment when it was starting to really take off in the industry. And some of the places where with which I was working, I was part of the Hortonworks PSO at the time when the Hortonworks and Hadoop were the important piece of the big data, the premier piece of the big data and data science. I, after that, worked with a whole bunch of the big names of the data science. I'm currently privileged to be able to say that through my career, that was enterprise architect, data scientist, and big data architect. And over the last 10, 15 years, I was privileged to be in a position that 5 of the current Fortune 10s were my clients in a role of the consultant or trainer, and that I was on the ground floor when when many of those organizations were trying to establish some of their important projects. And for the number of Fortune 500s, I was on the ground floor when they were designing their data strategy and what is AI really about. And other than that, Ph.D. in computer science, also Six Sigma Master Black Belt, somebody who lives with one leg in data science and technology, with another leg into what is it for, and how we actually make the business results. And the reason why I brought the book and ultimately how I finished the Cure podcast was that I believe that there is much more to the AI than let's just have a lot of hype about how AI would do some great things, and start actually talking about what some of those great things are and how the mere mortals would finish there.
Right. Very good. Very good. Well, I know the number one thing that people it's so funny that I hear this every time you mention AI to anybody, the first thing they think is, how is it going to eliminate jobs? How is AI going to come in there and basically kick humans out of employment? And I think that's completely wrong, but that's the first thing a lot of people think about. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that there is a big element of learned helplessness in it, because notice even how it is presented. First thing I'm hearing about AI is that it's going to eliminate the job. So if I knew nothing about AI, now I'm imagining some dead entity coming from the dark space that is suddenly coming in, obliterating the jobs for the fun of it. AI is not just happening. It's actually being constructed by people in big companies, by premier data scientists, in some ways by people like me. And I think that we are having too little agency in what we are talking about when we say AI would destroy the jobs. AI certainly could destroy the jobs, especially if your best idea is let's leave everything as is, and let's just figure a way that one small piece of my business operation is done cheaper. And yes, in that situation, AI is certainly a job destroyer. However, there are also abilities to create the new jobs with it and the new industries. I think that the big problem is not just the loss of the jobs, although that's happening, that the thing that we are not talking enough about is actually, are are we trying to actually create new capabilities we didn't have? Are we able to create new viable jobs? In my book, I'm giving an example. Let's say that, for example, you create with AI doggy sitting service. And let's say that that covers about 92–95% of the needs for the dog. But that if the dog has medical issue, that then you don't want AI to actually train on pets that have medical issue. You want to escalate it to human.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? That job was not viable before because occasional babysitter that is going to take care of the dog was or the full-time job for people who could afford to have a babysitter for a dog all the time, or it was something that you simply had to do without. This is something in the middle. And that is an opportunity to create the jobs that are not viable with AI. One of the things I'm challenging people in my book as an exercise is think how would you actually create a job that did not exist before with AI. And interestingly, one of the things that I always try to do in life is to ask what is the question that I'm not hearing that immediately comes to my mind. I'm hearing a lot about loss of jobs. I'm not hearing enough about how do we actually create it using AI.
Yeah, because people think about it as an AI job, right? There's this underlying tendency to think, oh, well, I'm an accountant, right? So an accountant, let's say an accountant's job was eliminated by AI. So they're thinking, oh, I got to train myself in AI and machine learning and computer vision and stuff like that. But that's not the reality. The reality is you don't need to necessarily have a AI support job. You can have a job that was basically created by AI because it was able to more efficiently do this thing that we couldn't pay a human to do, right? And that ended up generating all these other jobs out of that task that it's performing. But so the question is, I like the way that you're sort of aligning it with business needs. How can you possibly develop a business plan when you have no idea if this AI can, or how this AI can create a job? How do you create jobs out of nothing, assuming that AI is able to, like, let's say, for example, in your dog sitting example, I'm thinking you're probably looking at some kind of a dispatching mechanism that can actually take the calls in and then farm it out to humans and robots and whatever. Like, how can you model that in such a way that you can actually say, look, this is actually a viable business?
Well, first of all, one of the reasons why it is my great privilege to talk with you is that your audience has a lot of the startups and entrepreneurs in it, and that in some ways, what I did just put in front of your audience is a challenge of exercise your agency. Do actually something as opposed to expecting that AI is going to magically solve your problems, because guess what? It wouldn't. And I would actually start with exactly the opposite question. What is really your business? So when we're talking about business like this, we are talking about something, and this might be my Six Sigma Master Black Belt now starting to pop up a little. But the question is, what's really your business? What are the processes that you are trying to do? What's your business case? Effectively, you start with the fact that a lot of the dogs are not getting entertainment, that they are pretty much stuck, and that when owner is not there, they are exercising like my dog acrobatics on what kind of the furnitures they're going to jump on in order to get the best view of the outside.
Yeah.
So the question is then, well, first of all, can you even know how the dog feels? Second, can you entertain the dog with something? And at that point, what you're starting to ask is, what are the actions that I could take? And one big advice, if your listeners do not actually remember anything from this conversation, I advise them to remember, start with actions you could take in a business. The space of the real business actions you could take is actually severely constrained. At any point, chances are that in whatever business you are running, you would not really have a choice between maybe more than 10 things that you could realistically do. Because business requires that you put together the people together, to put the resources together, to put capabilities together, that's very constrained problem. AI could do a ton of the different things, hoping that it's going to show your business that is suddenly going to become something you could execute on, is a little bit of playing the lottery. Mm-hmm. Instead of that, once when you ask concrete questions, how could I entertain the dog? How could I actually know what the dog is doing? Now you are able to start working backwards and map those capabilities back. And in many ways, you could say, well, wait a second. Is the dog getting out of his mind? How could I know that? Well, I could use something like a video and computer analysis of the video. I could be using an accelerometer and trying to figure out what the dog is doing. I could be trying to entertain him in many different ways, that from the puzzles to the sounds to the food disposal to maybe even emitting some interesting smells that he did not felt before. And suddenly you are starting to talk some really concrete questions. Now you do not have some nebulous point like, hey, what can AI do? Now you have a question of, is this something that could be recognized by the video? Is that currently something that AI could do and how much it would cost me? What's my bill of materials for instrumentation of the house that I need to make here? Is this subscription business or it is a one-time business? And for that matter, what's exactly my business proposition? What are my streams of income? Do not allow yourself to be intimidated by AI and get some data scientists throwing the formulas on the whiteboard. And instead of that, concentrate on what could you actually do. Notice that in my answer, AI is not playing central role in running your business. That's actually, my friend, your job. It is actually playing the role of the capability that is a missing piece of the puzzle of how you build successful business. And you were involved in enough startups to know that that is actually what the startups were always about.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that everyone is always looks at it in a black and white way, right? It's like AI is going to come here and eliminate my complete job. And in reality, it's going to be augmenting what you can do and augmenting what your organization can do, right? Because it's basically duplicating, triplicating the capabilities that you have. So it's almost like hiring people to do those jobs, but in this case, it's much less expensive, right? Exactly. Although I don't know how much AI costs right now. So if I were to bring it in and implement it to do a particular task, how would I know if? And that's why I'm kind of asking for from a business case perspective. When you say, yes, I'm going to do this dog walking service, and it's going to be profitable because I've put in this AI component that eliminates this set of costs. How do you model that? I mean, do you just put 0 for the number of people that you need to do that?
Well, certainly would need some people. And that, of course, will depend on the particular technology that you have. In this particular case, the question is going to be, first of all, if you have one person per dog, you already know that works. It's called dog sitting service.
Yep.
And putting the camera to watch the dog is, in many ways, relatively simple extension of it. Now, obviously, what you're trying to do here is to exceed that. And instead of having one person watching one dog, and chances are that if people had the money for that, they would have already paid the dog sitter. You are actually looking at how can one person watch many dogs. Mm-hmm. Then the question is going to become, of the common dog actions that need to be watched, and you simply have a list, action A, action B, action C, which one of them could be recognized using the AI today? And as opposed to some nebulous problem, what you're trying to do is to effectively ask what's the best case, what's the worst case scenario. And I'm calling that also min-max analysis. And in effect, what you're asking is, with some common off-the-shelf system that I got a couple of people to put together for a day or two of their time, what is kind of the effort of the results that I'm getting? If that is good enough, guess what? That comes back to the minimum viable product, and it is then the dance that you know how to dance. On the other side, if it is not possible to do it with a minimum system, then the next question that's going to pop up was, is this the problem that anybody successfully solved? And guess what? 10 years ago, answer would be no. I mean, there was a time when the whole data science competitions were about recognizing dog versus cat. And it was not even that long ago. It was maybe a decade ago, less than that. At that time, if that was your business idea, then I have a result for you that says, well, actually, this is not viable business, and you do not spend a few $1 million building a prototype that ultimately doesn't work, unless you happen to be an R&D institution. Yeah. You actually say, you know what, it's not its time yet. On the other side, today, you actually know by the relatively simple Google search that Google can relatively easily recognize the dogs. And at that point, you might be asking, well, can any AI that I could find recognize this particular set of the actions that is important for me? That's your maximum analysis. And if you are actually now, you are going to have a set of cases. First case is that even the thing that you put together with the duct tape is going to give you something that is viable business result. Second one is that even the best one that humankind did so far is not good enough for you to have the viable business case. In that case, if you are a startup, unless you happen to be world's leading expert in that exact area, my advice is that you shut down that and do something more productive. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Because if the Stanford, Berkeley, Google spend that many years of the most brilliant minds we have in a field, and they don't have something concrete to show up that would solve your problem, chances are that you are a startup that you're putting together is probably not going to solve it either. Mm-hmm. And then there is a possibility that you're somewhere in the middle. What you're doing is above the minimum, but minimum is not enough. You know that the maximum is enough. At that point, you have some concrete prototype. At that point, the question is, how far am I, and what pieces of my prototype I actually need to improve, and how much of the improvement I need before it becomes viable. So in some ways, you're starting to look at the AI the same way as you're looking at other businesses. You were, from what I understand, personally involved in a number of the startups. Let me guess, some of those startups used databases, correct? Mm-hmm. I would guess that you are not certified DBA on top 3 databases today.
No, maybe a while back, but not now.
And guess what? You actually managed DBAs.
Yep.
So why? We understood how to operationalize the processes that exists in the building of the business that requires database, to the point that people who have strong technology background like you do not have to really understand the minute details of how databases work in order to be able to run them. Yep. Run the teams that have them. And AI should be like that. It is simply a set of the steps, and my book actually describes how you do that. But in effect, what you are saying is, this is a system. This is how I analyze the system. This is where I see where is the biggest sensitivity to the investment. And then the rest of the question becomes the dance that we were playing with every new startup that we ever had. Effectively, there is an idea, there is a set of tools, there is a gap between what can be done today and what needs to be done for me to have a viable product. There is a gap closure plan, and there is a scaling plan. Mm-hmm. And if you get all of this working, then you have something very concrete. I would also warn not to over-emulate big boys. So the fact that Google does something might be cool, especially if you're an engineer whose ultimate goal is to have a job in Google.
Right.
Because if I could actually get a ton of the experience in whatever Google wants, then I could get a job in Google, and that is definitely a viable business plan, but right. A little bit more viable for individual than for the startup.
That's right. That's right.
The important thing for you is not how could I, with my first startup and my first AI effort, go ahead and push the frontier of the AI, unless you actually already happen to be somebody who has a kind of the background that it is reasonable to expect you could do so.
Mm-hmm.
Your job is not to really emulate it, because big part of the reason why all the big companies used to have AI projects was simply that something big was happening in AI. And in some ways, it was, among other things, I don't want to speak in their name, but to me, it was always looking like that there is an element of insurance policy there. Mm-hmm. In the sense, if I'm in a charge of the Fortune 20 or Fortune 50, that could have actually been potentially something big with the AI, even if there is a 5 to 10% chance that it would work. Few $1 million on a project are a reasonable thing and a reasonable investment for me to make, if for no other reason so that I do not have to stand in front of the board and say, well, it was my decision that it is not something we would invest into, and that's why our competitors did it and we didn't.
Right, right.
Well, that's very different business proposition if you are talking about 0.01% of your revenue to be spent on a particular problem, versus if you are talking about the main expense items of your startup plan. Consequently, don't emulate what other people are doing. Do not try to cherry pick something that you saw them doing that you might also do. That's the definition of being in commodity business, or commoditizing the market. Instead, ask, what is my business proposition and how I could use AI concretely for that? And think about AI as a form of the magnifying glass. And I might even have a little bit of the picture here, and I do not know would your listeners see the video, but I could show you a picture quickly.
Sure, you can try it. I've never tried sharing video, but we can give it a shot.
Could you see this?
Yeah, I can see it.
So in effect, this is what AI and any kind of analytics was for the long time. And when you put it together, it comes to, there is a way to get the information, to get the data, some form of the sensing. It could be as simple as us reading something from the database, or it could be as complicated as I need to devise the totally new Internet of Things device that is going to give me that data. There is also a reaction. What would I do when I know? And then there is an analysis, and good way to think about it. And when I work with executives, that's one of the things that I always ask. I ask, what can you do in your business? Then I ask why you did not do it yet. And usually you don't know something. You need something. Then I actually see in which cases AI could do that. And when I could see that AI could actually close the gap, especially if that is a capability that nobody tried again, suddenly there is some competitive advantage that exists there. And there is a viable business. And effectively, then you would be asking for each one of these business problems that you are putting your AI on. Can you obtain the data? Can concrete the main action be taken? And like I said, always start with the actions you can take, because that's where you are really constrained. And then, is analysis technically possible? And also notice that this immediately ties AI to the business, and it's also tying it to the business metric that is going to make your business viable. So what's your next step after that? Your next step is going to be that you are going now to ask, when you are being reported the results as an executive, to be reported results in the form of some business metric. And to give you an example of the anti-pattern that I see smart executives falling into with a data scientist, I like to joke that it's very often a little bit of like a cartoon, in which you have people at the meeting that say one thing and think another. Mm-hmm. And executives usually think something like, oh man, I have no idea what this data scientist just said. To make things worse, sounds like something I was learning on my MBA course, and maybe it is something I'm even supposed to know because it sounds like statistics, and I never really paid attention in a business school on it. Don't feel bad about it. Chances are that you are executive because you love people anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
And then what do? You fall back on what you already know. You know people. And you say, this is my people. They will make me money.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
In the meantime, here is a bubble that is coming from the data scientist. Man, I'm not really that much money oriented. That's the reason why I got Ph.D. in theoretical mathematics in the first place. But I would tell you my mathematics, and you would figure out how to make money.
Right.
What could go
Isn't
wrong?
That's the perfect duo, right?
Perfect duo. I mean, it was probably better duo a year ago than it would be a year from now, because a year ago you could afford more to waste money on the things that would not work. But instead of that, what you should be asking is, what does this mean in a business terms? I would give you an example. I was of one situation that was happening. There was a group of the people that were listening to the presentation of the data scientist, and they were listening to some metric that was called the Gini Coefficient. And they were listening to it, and they were like, oh, it's really good that it's getting better in that metric. And finally, somebody asks those people, so not to be obnoxious, but big boss, can you tell me what is a Gini coefficient? Not to be obnoxious, but deputy of the big boss, can you tell me what's a Gini coefficient? And obviously nobody knows. Well, for what's worth, that's the measure of inequality between two classes.
Yeah, it's funny that you should mention that, because that's exactly the kind of thing. I mean, I'm taking MBA classes right now, and that's exactly the kind of thing I probably should have remembered.
And I actually
it sounds like something I came across, but I just didn't remember what it meant. But go ahead.
And I actually have contrarian view there. My view is actually that in a school we teach, and listen, I have PhD, I have second master's in engineering management after PhD. I spend my time in a school, so I don't want to say that school doesn't matter, because I clearly thought it does. But I would still say a lot of things that we learn in a school is not necessarily something we have to apply to be successful in career. And I would put it opposite. Maybe if you were business successful without having to know what's a Gini coefficient, maybe that's not the metric you care much about. By the way, while I happen to know what it is, I certainly don't know how to tie it to the relevant business problem that was being discussed at the time.
Right.
And instead of that, maybe there are metrics like dollars. And I hear from the reliable sources, business people are pretty good in comprehending. Maybe something should be described in dollars. By the way, just to say, when I use money in this conversation or anything else, I'm just using it as a convenient shortcut. There are many things that we could do in the NGOs, in the charities, frankly, even in what's happening in country now. This is being recorded during the COVID-19 epidemics, in which money is not changing hands necessarily. So as a money, I'm thinking about something that's quantifiable, that you could actually say, what is the result I got? If I'm a charity, to how many people I helped. And effectively, the question is, how do we tie the technical result with some form of the business result? There is a lot of the technical tricks that go into it. I don't want to say to people that they absolutely need to read my book in order to get that. But I certainly don't also want to go into the details with during the podcast that are too technical. The point you need to remember as an executive is that this technology or could be tied to some concrete business result. or it couldn't. If it couldn't, there is a technical name for it. It's called science project.
And a lot of these organizations are not really interested in science projects. You know, they're looking for something that increases their profits. But that sort of is a great lead into my next question, is that I work with a lot of corporate innovators who have internal innovation labs, right? And they're looking at all the newest technologies out there to see how they could apply them to their current business. Or I noticed in your slide you showed business problems. So I'm assuming that's applying to business problems that they haven't solved yet, or business problems that they've already solved with maybe a less effective method. So how can you decide as a corporate innovator that, hey, this is a good project for AI and this is not a good project for AI? Do you have ways of determining that?
Absolutely. Like I said, it's always important, and I would even go in a broader scope of the R&D. I mean, at one point, I remember an organization that was mentioning that they would like to use the patents as the form of the result that their R&D team is putting out.
Mm-hmm.
Problem with that, and in many ways critique I had, was that patents are actually fairly easy to get as long as you actually don't care about working on important problems. However, I mean, you could, I don't know, you could create the system for automated painting of the dolls, of the children's dolls, that would be painting them in obnoxious colors. I'm sure that how to actually make dolls something that no child would want to play with is patentable, if for no other reason because there was never the group of people with the technical talent, time to waste, and frankly, low respect for their ability to contribute to humankind, that heavily applied themselves to that problem. So in that respect, as always, any kind of R&D and AI is not different in the industry setting, has to be tied with something that you could actually execute on.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is a big filter. There are things that you are going to be good in executing on. There are things that you are not going to be good at executing on. Reasons for it could be marketing, they could be organizational, they could be organizational politics, they could be different constraints. But reality is you cannot actually line up the jobs. And advice that I sometimes give, and maybe this is more for you and other podcasts, but advice that I sometimes give is do not ask the questions if you would not actually do anything with answers.
Right, right.
And in many ways, if you do not have ways to actually act on the answers, there is no point spending money in actually getting the answers.
Mm-hmm.
Big filter is what can you actually do? And from that one, then comes the question of why you are not doing it yet, and the time-honored tool of the management called gap analysis,
mm-hmm.
which is, this is where I'm today, this is where I need to go in the future. And this is actually capabilities I'm missing. And AI is in many ways slick. And what you're effectively asking is, if I need extra, is there an AI solution that could do it? Notice that this suddenly becomes very concrete problem. Mm-hmm. Because now as an executive, you could actually say, you know what, I need a consultant, if you are having budget for consultants, that has a good overview of the field X. Chances are that if I lock myself in a room with it, I might run to most of my R&D backlog or potential R&D project backlog and have a general idea is something maybe possible. Immediately that cools out 90% of the noise. And then after that, it gives you the profile of the people that you could hire. Those data scientists that have a good accomplishment, most of the data scientists today is not actually capable of being an expert in the whole data science. Reason for that is that AI is a huge field, that they might have something, that there is many different fields that you could say are important for AI. programming, big data, operational research, communication, business, presentation, machine learning, etc., and robotics even. And you could get a PhD or even a tenure in Ivy League school, knowing just one of those fields really well. Clearly, there is not possible to have a single individual that knows all of them to the highest possible level. So now is when you have a very concrete problem. Now you are actually starting to have very concrete skills for which you could hire. So that's the difference that we have in, for example, computers, because today you hire Node.js developers, you hire Keras developers, you hire PostgreSQL DBAs. You do not hire general technical geek. I need a geek that knows something with the computers.
That's right. It's really specific.
Exactly. And one of my big goals is to actually make AI something that could really help us in industrial evolution that we are undergoing today. And I do not think that the mysticism that we are building around AI is helping in any way. It might be helpful for maybe a little bit of the marketing, but we already had enough marketing of the AI. What we actually need now are results. And my advice is that if you're an executive, you should be actually able to have type of the conversation with your data science leads, like you and me are now having. My job as a consultant is in many ways to put you as an executive at ease. It's actually perfectly okay that you do not remember some obscure detail from the statistical class. What is not okay is that you are having a hard time voicing, hey, stop, I actually don't get this part. Can you tie it to something that I really care about? And I believe that big part of that is a mysticism, because we are conditioned to accept AI as something that would magically solve our problems. So we are afraid not to show up enough faith when we are actually on the meetings with AI.
Well, but AI is going to solve all of our problems, isn't it? I mean, it's going to make our world totally wonderful. But it's kind of like, why hasn't it happened yet? I mean, do you think where we are with AI, I mean, what's the biggest thing that's keeping us back from implementing it? I mean, is it's too expensive? Do we not know what to apply it to? Are people afraid? I mean, what is it that's stopping people from like moving full force towards bringing in more AI solutions?
I might give you minority answer, maybe even minority of one. I have a tendency to believe that in many ways it's lack of agency. That we actually spend a lot of our lives in a systems that generally worked pretty well for us. And that in many ways we learned to be helpless. And that especially when we were actually relatively successful relatively compared to other people, when we were running the good companies, when we actually had some accomplishments, that it is maybe a little bit difficult to admit that we were often not really thinking about how to rethink the systems in which we were operating. How we were trying for solutions at the margin sometimes, and as a result, we were hoping for, in many ways, for the silver bullets. What I'm advocating is that we need to rethink what can we do in the world, take responsibility for re-engineering some of the systems that we have, and actually use AI as a tool we did not have before. Because when those systems were engineered, they were engineered by wickedly smart people. But guess what? They actually did not know the world as we know it today. They did not have the tools that we have today. And chances are that they would not have engineered many of our systems in a way that they're engineered if they actually had the tools we have today. I think that in many ways our lack of success with AI comes from and I would not call it lack of success, maybe that's the wrong term, because we clearly had some very significant successes. I mean, computers now could recognize images, video, text, even have the relatively simple question-answer conversation with you. It is, however, that we did not really change the world fundamentally, in a sense that we did not solve some of maybe 10 biggest problems we were hoping we would solve.
Right.
And the reason for that is that AI is too dumb to do it yet, and that humans are too skittish to augment it in the areas where only we actually have the capabilities.
Yeah.
And I think that in big part what we actually need is, instead of looking at AI would bail us out and we don't need to do anything, start thinking about what we can actually do. What are the concrete problems we have? How to solve them with the concrete crutches that come from the AI, and instead of the artificial general intelligence, to more think about how we would build symbiosis between the human and the technology. And if you look at the successful examples of where technology helped us, they're mostly symbiotic today. I mean, I would not let you pry my smartphone from my hands. And it's something that I definitely need. And no, that smartphone is not smarter than me, but I happen to, or at least not smarter than your listeners, I don't know about me. But I know that I'm smarter when I happen to have it with me, because I could do some concrete things with it, like access to information, without going to library. I think that as we are building those symbiotic systems, as we are using AI concretely in the areas within our expertise, that we would both build the set of the processes, and my hope is that my book is the first move in that direction, as well as set of expertises in a better and better applications of the AI, because I like to call that like a hunt. You initially, if you are a hunter that is meant to stay in a genetic pool, you do not start by hunting the mammoths. Mammoth is a pretty big thing, and if you corner it and it turns around, you might be suddenly in for the world of pain.
Yep.
You actually start by hunting rabbits, then figuring out something bigger, and eventually building enough expertise that you could take big game down. For the listeners who object to the animals examples, you could make same example with the farming or whatever suits your fancy. I'm just trying to appeal to the mental models we all have.
Yeah.
I'm challenging us to all catch a couple of rabbits in a ways that would make our startups viable and build the expertise. Stop talking about AI as something that is difficult to discuss between executive and data scientists, and actually have the conversations that are linking those two things together in a way. And some of those conversations might even have to be behind the closed doors. Maybe it is something that parts of the education should happen on both sides outside of the view of the whole team. I'm not saying that you have to carry, I don't know anything about AI on every meeting, but I would challenge you as a very smart person to push your data scientist on, wait a second, I'm a smart guy. I don't get this. This is not my fault. It's yours. You're not explaining it well. Now,
so I want to go back to a couple of things one thing that you said before on agency. So it's interesting that you should mention agency, because I think that this is an interesting problem that I'm thinking that we're struggling with, is that, human nature, if you ask me, human nature is like, one aspect of human nature is laziness, right? People don't want to do stuff that they don't like doing, right? They enjoy spending time doing the things they like to do, but then there's a whole raft of items that we don't like doing, but we have to do. And I was always under the impression that if we had some systems that were able to take those off our plate, then we'd be happy with that. But then I've come across people who say, no, I don't want that. I don't want that to happen. I wanted to keep my agency on this. I want to make sure I can control all this. So, I mean, where do you see us going? Do you think people are more open to allowing an AI type system to sort of take over some of the elements in their lives? Or do you think that they're still like, or if that's going to happen, like how far out is it?
Help me with analogy. Was that Apollo's temple in Delphi, where one of the writings is all in moderation?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I have maybe I am not using, maybe I am mixing it with something, but I think that there are no absolute answers in what we are doing. Total agency would mean chaos, because if we actually do everything the way we want without any limitations, then obviously at some point the right to swing the fist has to stop on somebody's forehead. At the same time, total abdication of the responsibility of the agency is not a solution. I am a big advocate for having the agency within the scope of the business that you do. The sole reason for existence of executives is to be able to actually direct the company in a particular direction.
Mm-hmm.
If that role is actually something that is fundamental to the job and something that I think you should be exercising the close supervision of. I would even go a step further to say that if the computer could comprehend your business problem for you and could actually produce the business action for you, I would be concerned about executive jobs.
But isn't it true that there's going to be, like, I remember seeing, so I'm involved with the Institute for the Future, and they were talking about the future of work, and they said basically jobs are going to, every organization is going to collapse into 3 layers. It's going to be the executives, there's going to be a bunch of algorithms in the middle, and there's going to be the workers at the bottom. And you may or may not have a wizard class of software developers who actually build the algorithms, but that's where they think things are going to end up. I mean, do you think that that's a possible vision?
Well, ultimately, I'm in a lucky position that by the time when something like that happens, first of all, I'm not seeing much need for executive side. Because if algorithms could actually take most of the jobs in the middle, reality is that we very often promote executives in the middle management. So, first of all, I do not believe that vision is going to, if it is to materialize, I'm not sure that it would materialize in that particular way. I'm also not sure that then you cannot say that by the time that AI is so smart, especially if it reaches level of AGI, then we might finish in a world in which there are no jobs. But frankly, at that point, there is a surplus of production in many ways to address that problem. So I'm not sure that at that time it is a particular as big of the problem. I think that it's a big problem when we are actually just using AI to substitute few jobs and leaving everything else the same. I would certainly also point out that in the long run, a lot of things happen. But the life is what happens between now and the long run.
Yeah.
And I would say that even if that is the end point, and reasonable people could disagree, is it the end point? There is a lot of the work between now and then. And I'm a believer that we need to actually understand what AI could do for us. And I will give you one scary example. This is from one of the previous conferences, so this is an example that I'm citing in my book. But what is happening is that there was a whole bunch of the people on the panel about is causality important. And bear with me, this is going to sound technical, but I would actually make a point. And I was not on that panel, but very established people, but much more established people in AI, some of which have credentials to claim that they started AI, deep learning field, were on it. And there was a question of, if algorithms do something, is it important to know the causes?
Mm.
And one school of thought goes that it is not, because if you have a result, who cares? Other school of thought was using an example of the question if you have pneumonia. And this was pre-COVID days, so I'm not talking about COVID. The question was, should you be hospitalized or not? And at that time, and again, this is not COVID related, one of the things that you would see if you look at the data was that there is a prediction that if you have asthma, you were less likely to have severe pneumonia case.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean if you're asthmatic that I should just send you home? Well, no. Fortunately, doctors operate in causal domain, and they were pretty adamant that having asthma is not an advantage, that it's actually doubly bad. So why was this happening? Because people who happen to have asthma are more attuned to their breathing. They notice earlier that something is wrong. They seek the help earlier. What you're seeing is an artifact of the fact that the help was asked for sooner.
Mm.
Today, a lot of the systems that we use in AI are actually basically correlational. They're not causational. They could tell you that A could go with B. Most of the causational systems, some luminaries like Judea Pearl excluded, but they're not by any means mainstream in AI today, are not having abilities to create causations. Now, I mentioned before that this is also being recorded at the time of the COVID epidemic. I very much liked many of the views that you put forward in regard to this epidemic. And yes, obviously this is going to pass, and there would still be a world after this is done. But it's also sure that that world in many ways would be slightly to moderately, sometimes even substantially different than the world that we left when we went into the lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
That's a world in which I would think that human agency and actually bringing up causation and understandings of what is happening would be tremendously important, because a lot of data mining is going to break. Those systems were trained in a world that was fundamentally different in at least some areas than the world that you would encounter. So this is maybe a long answer, but I would say that I probably fundamentally disagree with the premise that was described, because first of all, I do not think that the end state is going to be as described. Mm-hmm. Second, I am not sure about the timeline of the end state, and I'm sure that the immediate future is going to be exactly the opposite. Mm-hmm. And once immediate future is over, I don't know, I don't know how long it would take us to get there. And it's certainly possible that ultimately we would have artificial ability to do most of the jobs with AI. But I think that instead of despairing about how the world could become, we have obligations as technologists and executives to actually build it in a way that it should be first. Mm-hmm. And instead of saying that's impossible, I think that we ought at least to try. And I don't think that we gave it a good try yet.
No, you're right. You're right. So one last question, because we're getting close to time here. So, you know, I'm a futurist and I talk about futurist stuff all the time. So I want to get your thoughts on where we will be in 2030. What's the world going to be like in 10 years?
Generally speaking, I am hoping to see the world in which we are using technology toward the concrete goals of what we need to make our lives better. And we do not let technology just emerge and change that world and then be surprised that that was an effect that nobody expected. Mm-hmm. I believe that we would have a generation that grew up with the technology and is much less scared of it than maybe the previous generations were. And much less scared would also mean much less impressed. I think that we are moving in a world in which the promises of the future would have to become fairly concrete and would actually be the promises of there is something that I need that is making my life immediately better. Mm-hmm. That might be meaning systems that are in many ways helping us remove many drudges, and like you pointed out, commute might be one of those. Mm-hmm. And teleconference systems might evolve to the point that we are feeling like we are in the same room.
Yeah.
I'm expecting to see maybe significantly better use of the technology in the medicine, and not just incremental use in which we effectively have a new version of the thing we had 5 years ago, but are starting to actually address combination of the data and the actions that we could take, maybe in a preventive ways, mm-hmm. which is probably one, hopefully, things that would come out positive of this epidemic on the technology side. But I'm seeing, frankly, world in which we have less vague promises and more concrete solutions mm-hmm. that are going to happen with the technology. And I would actually say that in many ways, if I look at the decades between 1980 and maybe invention of the iPad, that was what we used to do the best. There were relatively concrete things that came out of it. Some of them might have run wild. It's not clear boundary. I hope that it would be much less this time. But I think that the questions of concreteness and the questions of addressing immediate needs would dominate next decade. And I think that long-term goals that are lofty and should be achieved, but are conveniently far enough so that you do not have to be the person accomplishing them during your career and could be retired before they're done, are going to hopefully still be with us, but would have to share to compete for the primacy and the mind share with the concrete improvements for the people around us right now.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. This was great. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about how, if somebody wants to get in touch with you or what you were saying, telling me a little bit about your book and stuff like that so we can wrap up.
Absolutely. So the best way today to get in touch with me is probably LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And I'm Veljko Krunic, running Krunic Consulting, LLC. Considering my book is written for the project leadership of the AI project. And you are thinking about running AI project, you are thinking about running AI startup, did a little bit of your homework, and you are now wondering how I actually make the thing successful with AI. The book is intended to speak to the executive and his advisor, the group, the senior data scientists, and to provide the missing link between the technology and business. And in some ways, it's my way of walking the walk when I'm talking about agency, because it is giving an examples of the concrete things we could do. It is giving an example how you could look at your organization, how you could elicit business case, how you could know, is this something that's likely, if technically successful, to be implemented and make money or make some other form of measurable result, and how to run the project in such a way that you actually reach that goal. AI knowledge is not strictly required. It does not certainly hurt you to have it, but as you're going to see, I'm speaking to both data scientists and telling him that it's important to actually keep in mind business case, and speaking to executives and saying your job is not to become a data scientist. Your job is to run the projects that have a data science component.
Perfect.
And this is how to do it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
It was great talking with you too. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I'll probably